Welcome back, everybody, to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. My name is Matthew Head, and on this episode, we have Nicola James. She is the founder of Lexic. Lexic provides psychologists to help organisations in developing an environment where neurodiversity can flourish. Alongside this, she's also founded Neurotalent Unlocked, which is an online training platform to raise awareness for managers and to help employees with neurodiversity. She's a chartered occupational psychologist. Before she went into her own business, she worked in HR for companies such as Rolls-Royce and BAA. As always, I will post links to Lexic and anything else we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Nicola.
Hi there.
It's great to have you on. We met on a webinar for Claro Software, and I think our stories sound very similar. So it's going to be really interesting to get into it.
Oh yeah, it was really interesting to talk about sort of like the psychology of the relationship of being dyslexic and how it makes you feel.
That was where I was going to start off with. Where does your interest in psychology come from?
So I've wanted to be a psychologist ever since the age of about 13, 14, to the extent where I travelled quite a long way to study psychology A-level. So for me, it's the interest. I've always been interested in learning difficulties. And it was the interest in sort of the person side as well as the science side. And I thought that psychology blended the questions and terms I had about my own consciousness plus the science and the maths. And I quite like that combination.
Okay, so you were saying about sort of how different people think. Did you already know you were dyslexic by that point, or when did you find out along the journey?
I was diagnosed in my third year of university, so I was diagnosed very late. When I was younger, I did see an educational psychologist, and they were like, she's just having problems reading, but they didn't give me any tests. It was very sort of just a chat with me at a very young age. But I definitely knew that I struggled because my brother just managed to get A's, in my perception, very easily. And I would do lots more work. I would read lots more. It took me longer to read. And I would struggle with reading, and I still didn't manage to get the grades. But when I did anything practical, I always did quite well. Or if I had to explain a subject to my friend who might be struggling with an essay, I could do that very easily. I could say, these are the books you read, this is what you should do. And they would do quite well in their essay. I always just find it really hard to get my thoughts down in a linear page.
Yes. But did you find that you explain it to your friend and they'd actually get better marks than you did, even though you more or less gifted them the information?
Basically, that would be the case. But I always had the understanding of a subject. But what would happen is I'd get so passionate about something. Like I did an essay on mental health and psychology, and I was so interested in it. I read so much, and I was working in clinical placements at the time. Mm-hmm. When it came to writing it down, I actually didn't know where to start because I had so much information, but it was more like a mind map in my head. Yeah. So I remember trying to get it down, and the actual lecturer said I didn't understand what I was talking about. But I actually did a presentation on exactly the same subject, and she gave me a first, and she hadn't correlated that. So I walked into her office, and I said to her, I was so upset. I was like, you've written this, and you say that I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm now going to tell you. I'm now going to tell you everything I know. And I spoke to her for about an hour because I was so upset because of the difference in disparity in comments and grades on the same piece. And what was interesting is I must have been quite emotional because I left the room and there was a lady that came out who was the head of department, and she was also coincidentally the head of like disability and accessibility and things like that. And I explained to her, and at that point, I think I knew I was dyslexic. I said, I think I'm dyslexic. And I explained what happened. And that sort of led me to getting assessed, and I was diagnosed. But I was diagnosed at quite a late point in the scheme of things. Obviously, it's early in comparison to other people, but in the scheme of education, I got diagnosed at quite a late point. And I think I just had an idea that I was dyslexic for probably about, well, I understood that label for about 2 or 3 years, just because of the sheer amount of work I did to scrape a 2-2 in my degree.
Okay. I guess doing psychology as a degree, because you said you found out in your third year, didn't you, of your bachelor's?
Yeah, I found out in the third year of my bachelor's that I had dyslexia.
So you're reading about how the mind works, and then are you actually sort of coming across dyslexia in your university work and like, oh, this profile fits me, or did you get an understanding of it?
No, I mean, the modules I chose, I didn't choose any of the educational psychology modules. I chose different. I chose consciousness. I chose modules on assessment and selection. I chose more workplace-based modules. But I think it was just the disparity between my understanding of something and my ability to write it down. And I also struggled to get words in my head. I remember being in the library and I would read and reread and reread, and it wouldn't go in. And it would be like me trying to force something into my head that didn't want to go in there. And it was really emotional because it would be like I would work 7 days a week to try and do this. And it was just much harder. And I'd be living with people at the time where, again, I experienced the same sort of process as my brother. They're going out with friends, they're doing the essays, 2 or 3 days before, and they're getting high grades. So I think that correlation has made me struggle.
2 or 3 days before, they're diligent students. I know engineers that were up the night before and hadn't slept.
Yeah, and I think but what I saw was I lived with, say, 3 people on the same course as me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was comparing the amount I worked and the grades I was getting in comparison to them. And there was just something that wasn't correlating.
Yes. I can see that. I remember I had it at school where we'd hand an essay and mine's 5 to 6 pages and everybody else is at least 15. And I'm like, how long did you spend on that, Matt? Well, 2-3 hours. Well, I spent an hour and have done 3 times as much. What? Hang on, how does this work? So I don't know much about what you have to study to do a psychology degree. Obviously, I went and did a STEM degree, which means that quite a lot of the early part is all maths and physics and coming up with concepts like that. So a lot of it doesn't involve writing stuff down, or when it did, it wasn't too heavy. I mean, even my dissertation was it ended up being 14,000 words, but the minimum was 7,500. So it's quite light compared to other subjects. But I'd imagine psychology is a lot more reading reports and distilling it into big essays, or am I completely rocking up the wrong tree?
Well, I mean, you basically, a lot of it is very similar. Maybe it's like a history degree. You're reading a lot of books. But you do have modules on stats where you're just looking at statistical concepts and how to process sort of scientific data and research. But you are reading a lot of text. I hadn't clocked on to doing a numbers-based degree to really do reading. But I didn't want to. I've always been interested in things like, why do we exist? Who are we? I've always been interested in how we work.
Yeah, and I've always been interested in how stuff works. So I didn't pick the engineering degree to get the numbers based. But no, the psychology stuff is really interesting. So that was a 3-year course you found out in the final year, but you've also been back to university since for another qualification, and you went to the same university. At that point, you would have known you were dyslexic. So then did you have a different experience?
I did my undergraduate at UW in Bristol.
Right.
And I remember being a little bit upset. I had to go through clearing because I didn't get the A-level grades. And I got into Bristol and it was actually a really good course. But when I got a 2-2, in order to get onto the Occupational Psychology Masters, I needed a 2-1.
Yeah.
So I then wrote and had an interview with the lead psychology lecturer at Nottingham to explain I'd only been just diagnosed. And so then I went to Nottingham and I got onto the course. And what was amazing is I accessed the Nottingham Dyslexia department, which was fairly new, which I didn't realise at the time. And I had tuition by a lady called Margaret Harrington, and it just made such a big difference. My grades went from so I think I had 1 session a week, and I had about 12 sessions. And with the coaching and the assistive technology, like software that reads out loud to you, mind mapping software that then converts your thoughts into a sort of essay-based structure.
Yes.
Within 12 weeks, my grades were going up to a 2-1, and to the point where the last essay I did, I got 1 point off a first. Oh. But the period of time that I saw that change was quite short in comparison. So what I started to realise is I started to learn strategies that aligned with how I think. So rather than reading in the library and rereading and trying to get the information in, suddenly there was assistive technology which read aloud to me. So not only could I take that in, but I took it in first time and it didn't require that cognitive loading. And also with the proofreading, rather than having to be so reliant on maybe my mum to proofread an essay, I actually could hear the text loud, so I could actually hear much more of what I'd written. Because very often what I thought I had written down isn't actually what I'd written. So in my head, it was different from what I'd actually written down. So it was just such a breakthrough. And it was like suddenly I wasn't having to force stuff into my head. And that process is just really emotional. And I think at the end of my degree, I got to a point where I'm giving up. I'm going to give up. I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't carry on. It's too much for me. I'm just going to have to get a job doing something else. And suddenly that's when everything sort of fell into place, the course, the tuition. And so ever since then, I've, not only did I start to believe in myself because I started to get the grades, but that also was something that's very passionate to me. So I went on and did my occupational psychology masters. I did a postgrad in neuropsychology. And I started to realise I was very entrepreneurial. I had lots of ideas. I remember having lots of business ideas. And the question I asked myself is, what is my heart? What am I most passionate about? And that was always dyslexia, because I wanted to help people who were like me so that they could start to believe in themselves and see success through the way that they learn. And that's where Lexic came from, in terms of, a group of psychologists providing a diagnostics and adjustments for all neurodiverse conditions, and providing, Neurotalent Unlock, which is the e-learning, to really support people in enabling themselves to understand how they learn, which then enables them to see success.
Wow, yes. It is quite a moment. I got stated dyslexic at 6, so I never quite had the aha, this is what it is moments. By the time I hit uni at 26, there was all the tools, and it amazed me the difference between leaving school at 16 and then college at 18 to then what you got. I think also my attitude had changed. I'd actually tell people I was dyslexic, which makes a huge difference in the education system. So that does move me on to Lexic, actually. You mentioned how you set it up to help other dyslexics like yourself have all the tools. Could you sort of delve into more about what Lexic actually does as an organisation?
So Lexic is basically, first of all, at the individual level, it provides diagnostics for autism, it provides ADHD screenings and dyspraxia, cognitive functioning diagnostics, dyslexia diagnostics. It provides workplace adjustments. So simply that's adjustments to support you at work, which could be with things like reading, writing, spelling, organisation, note-taking, etc. Those recommendations can be tools and tips. They can be different ways of working. They can be assistive technology. And then we do the one-to-one coaching, which is the support. So that might be teaching you skills on confidence, note-taking, etc. And then at the higher level, we do sort of consultations around neurodiversity strategies. So how an organisation can be neurodiversity accessible and have a strategy to support their employees. So that's more of an audit consultation piece through the whole employee life cycle, from recruitment to retention, etc. And then also we provide e-learning. So the e-learning is, awareness modules for managers on the different conditions, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, etc. And it provides skill-based strategy training for individuals with varying neurodiverse conditions. But I think the heart of what Lexic does, it's enabling somebody to go from I can't do to I can do. So it's having that self-belief, and then providing them with strategy so that they can go forward in their life, be more independent, more confident, and navigate the world in a way where they don't see it as against them, but they see it more as working for them because they understand themselves better.
Do you mostly work for organisations and then the individual in that organisation, or do individuals come to you?
It varies. I would say most of our work is working with organisations and then providing support for the individuals working inside. But we do have individuals that come to us directly. We're starting to get more into education as well. So it does vary, but our clients can be the organisation, the HR department, the occupational health department, the individual, eventually the universities, because we're starting to go into education and things like that. So it's quite a broad range. Sometimes we get parents calling us up and asking for advice. Sometimes we get a line manager that wants to support an employee. So how do you do that? So we do co-coaching with them or support them on their journey. So it varies.
Okay. And I see you're quite a fair-sized organisation now with quite a lot of psychologists. So I thought, first of all, we'd confirm exactly what an occupational psychologist is.
Me.
Yes.
Occupational psychologist is. So we have the varying consultants that vary across different sectors of psychology. So we have some clinical, some educational psychologists that do associate work with us. But an occupational psychologist working in neurodiversity is essentially trained in supporting individuals with neurodiverse conditions, which refers to ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, in the workplace. So it tends to be 16 plus. So we are looking at people from, say, apprenticeship level, GMBQ level, all the way up. So we are providing workplace skills that not only diagnoses, but we're looking at it from a workplace perspective. Whereas an educational psychologist will look at it much more from an educational perspective and will generally specialise in younger children, but they sometimes can come and do workplace assessments. So an occupational psychologist will be looking at strategies to help a neurodiverse individual within the workplace life cycle, from diagnostic to adjustment to coaching. And that can vary. And the occupational psychologist, it can be quite broad. They can specialise in coaching, assessment and selection. But in terms of neurodiversity, that's what we do.
Okay. And your team is a fair size. Are they all neurodiverse, or have you got sort of the standard kind of 10%? Or how? Because I was thinking, like yourself, obviously being dyslexic, can you feed your life experience into this?
40% of our team are neurodiverse, maybe a little bit less, but it's quite high. We've had, if you look at the growth team, particularly the business development team, there's more neurodiverse profiles in there. But I would also say that some people have actually come to us and then been diagnosed as well. So we actively want a broader way of thinking. So we try and attract diverse minds where possible because it just adds to the organisation. But we definitely enjoy recruiting neurodiverse minds, because then when they support a neurodiverse individual, they understand it. You can have people who are working externally with clients, but they can tell the story because they've experienced it themselves.
Yes, yeah, it's so
important, because what we find with our staff, particularly people that are neurodiverse or go on the neurodiverse journey, it's like you hear things like, this is the place where I actually feel like I can be myself, or I can explore myself, or I can be honest, because the culture aligns with the interest. So it also allows a freedom that maybe some people with neurodiverse conditions might not feel that they can be as free or as open in organisations that don't have the understanding of neurodiversity. So it makes me really proud, because I remember being worried about getting a job when I came out of university because of my dyslexia or not being understood. And so it's really nice to see people being enabled for who they are.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. And I think you want diverse people in your organisations, because every creative ideas.
If we had just psychologists in the organisation, we'd be all like thinking about the detail and all that stuff. But you need the bigger picture thinkers, you need the creatives, you need the people that can have concepts, you need the people that are really good at like critical thinking, jumping around, and that comes with the neurodiverse brain.
Yes, yeah. So it's the same with being an engineering team. Yeah, I might think differently to the guy next to me, although STEM's got quite a few neurodiverse people in it anyway. But we all come together.
We go into engineering firms a lot, and it was really lovely. We got approached by one organisation, and it was actually the engineering department approaching us. So it wasn't done from the university. They were looking to recruit talent. So you're starting to see that now, which is brilliant, because people are starting to, like coding companies in the US, people are starting to realise that there is a pool of people with certain skills they could really harness if they focused on a neurodiversity strategy. It's brilliant.
It is, and it genuinely surprises me. I mean, Dyslexia Life Hacks has come out to be a year old now, and how the talking around neurodiversity has totally changed. Like, dyslexia seems to. I've had guests on the podcast who are neurotypical, who are like almost missing out on something, or so it seems to them. It's like, wow, this wouldn't have been like this 5 years ago. I remember starting my grad scheme and being like, Matt, why is all this spelt wrong? Well, I don't know. So it is pretty amazing how people are changing their attitude to stuff, and I think it's a great step in the right direction. I was going to sort of circle back to your corporate job before you started Lexic and sort of dive into that, because Lexic's been going since 2007. So you spent quite a lot of the early 2000s in HR.
It was sort of human factors, HR, and sort of diversity-based stuff and HR projects. So it was quite varied, different roles.
And I sort of imagine HR departments would be the first place to be turned on to neurodiversity in a corporation. How did you find attitudes in corporate land before you sort of left?
Well, I tended to work in like maybe organizational development teams or learning development teams, like very specialist project teams. So it was less of the day-to-day. My first role was an interesting role. So that was where I would go out and I would do a lot of the collection of the assessments, which is absolutely fine. I was really good at that.
Okay.
And then when it came to writing the reports, I struggled with the spelling and the grammar. So what would happen is one person would check it, then someone else would check it. And so this person would correct this person's spelling, then they would correct theirs. And I was just so upset because I never got consistency. So whatever I changed, this person then corrected this person because then it would move to their style, because people write in different styles.
They do,
and then
yes.
I had one manager there who just basically said, I'll support her. And she was brilliant because it was consistent. And she was always very encouraging and gave me a lot of support. And then I found also in that role, I did a lot of investors in people work and I did really well for the organisation. So, I was still learning about myself, learning about what I enjoyed, what I was good at. But on the whole, I think at that time, the assistive technology wasn't necessarily as available in organisations. But I always found that when I asked what I needed, I got it. But I just found it very stressful. I remember going into work and crying at the thought of having my words and my work ripped up again in terms of my written style. So I think that then made me unconfident. But then I then built the strategies up since, but I was still unconfident at writing stuff. I still get quite sensitive. Like some people say, giving a presentation, they get sensitive. I love it. I can get on stage, no problem. I love it. Whereas writing something, I'm much more sensitive about that.
Yes.
And so I've started to write more blogs again to try and build up my confidence with writing. So I've written so much stuff, but I've never actually published anything and I'm actually getting really good feedback. So I'm starting to build up my confidence with writing by doing little pieces. So I would say that my journey in the workplace, no matter what happened, I still struggled with certain things, which then actually encouraged me maybe to design myself out into an environment where I could just flourish with my strengths. So I think subconsciously that then led me to set up a company, not only because I had loads of ideas.
Yeah.
I was really passionate about dyslexia and I wanted to work in it. So I got the training to work in it and the mentorship and all that stuff. But I think there was also a subconscious drive where I didn't want to feel this way because I'm very bright, but I was just stuck with the types of tasks like the written stuff, like the detail stuff. So by doing that, I then actually thrive. But I don't think I realised that was also a coping mechanism to stop me having to feel the stress of all of the stuff that dyslexia can cause within a written or reading constraint, I suppose.
Yeah. I see what you mean. So, you kind of designed your own job or set up a company that makes you feel at home.
I didn't actually set up a company. I wanted to work at something I loved. And I was like, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to do this because I love it.
Okay.
I didn't actually realise I was going to create a company and it just happened. And what I did is I went on quite a lot of courses and I remember going things like, buy a Baker Street dress so I look big, an 08445 number so I look big. And by doing that, I then, some of my first clients were people like Goldman Sachs and Barclays. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Wow.
So I created myself big and I looked big. But then I would go around the country and do all these diagnostics. I would work lots of hours and then I had associates. So I built it up from there because at the time neurodiversity wasn't as popular as it is now. So I didn't mean to create a company, but it just happened. But
just stumbled into it.
In the area that I just worked in what I loved. That's what I loved.
So Lexic is your first and only company you set up then until you did a Neurotalent Unlocked, or was there a couple of stumbles on the way?
No, I didn't set. When I set Lexic up, it was never a company. It was just, I thought it would just be me doing what I loved. So it created a company. So I never went out to create a company. So along the way, we've had Skills Rocket. So Skills Rocket was just a free online recorded strategy videos on neurodiversity. So I did that for a while. That was just to help people. So with Lexic and Neurotalent Unlocked was just, it's basically in partnership with Lexic. It's the same principle. It's the same stuff. It's just online training content. So I've never stumbled, but it was always about following my passion. It didn't matter if it was a company or not. I just wanted to help people in this area. So it's more of a labour of love than a labour of wanting to be a successful businesswoman. But as a consequence, I followed my heart. And if you follow your heart, things follow it. So then suddenly there's a company and I'm like, oh my God. So then I had to learn to run a company, and some of that stuff is quite difficult. And then you have to learn to ask for help. So then you have to face yourself. So things like being vulnerable and asking for help is quite hard because, I remember I really hated asking for help because when I had to get loads of help with reading, and then I became very independent with my reading. And so it sort of presses on all those buttons that maybe you pressed on where you felt that you weren't good enough because you had to ask for more help than the other child at school, for example. And that sort of gave you a sense of not being good enough. So during company, I had to work with myself. I had to do lots of self-development, which has been amazing. And, it's thanks to some of my early employees where, they were like, they had the skills that I didn't have, like Vicky Cars. She's like very good at detail, very good at managing people. So those early days where those people support you and then, you grow and all that stuff. So it's been an amazing journey. And like Vicky's coming up for 10 years at Lexic. So
oh, wow.
It's been such an amazing journey. And I've been so blessed with the people that have helped me along the way. And, where the company is today with Aidan running it, it's a really exciting journey. And it's just, it's just growing and changing. And I'm very privileged to witness not only all the people that we help, but to witness the journeys of some of our neurodiverse employees and see them grow in confidence and see them become managers and then see them help other people. So it's a really amazing thing to watch.
Yes. Yeah. I was genuinely surprised. I logged onto the website doing some research and was like scrolling through because it's only been established a while and it was a reasonable size. Like, wow, there's lots. This is quite a large organisation, really.
I think we're getting up to about 50 employees soon. Yeah. It's cool. Amazing. Yeah, and we've got associates as well.
And I was like, wow. One thing I need to ask, where did the name Lexic come from? It seems like a wordplay on dyslexic, but is there a funnier story?
Yes, it was. So to think about 2007, so you still had a fair few .coms available and not everything was on the internet. So it was a bit like this. I don't want to be called dyslexia because I knew we could grow beyond dyslexia. So I didn't want dyslexia in the title.
Okay.
So I played with things like lexical, which is like the sort of sounds in the words, and lexicon, which is words. And then I went to meet one of my friends from school, and she was seeing a guy at the time, and he was like went to Cambridge, and he was really good with words. So he goes, "How about this?" And I was like, "Oh, that's brilliant." So then I looked up the Lexic, Lexic, and then the .com was taken. So then I was like, "Let's put double X, so Lexic," and so it came about sort of the play on words, but we'd never wanted to have dyslexia in the title because we knew we'd grow beyond it. So it just provided a brand that you could grow beyond. And I just loved it. I love the double X. I think it's quite a powerful image.
Yes.
But basically, sort of behind it is the relationship with words, sound in words, that type of thing. Yes.
Yeah, it does.
More play on lexical and lexicon.
Yes. Yeah. Because it is quite it's a word you don't see, and then when you read it, like Lexic, I know what they do. Like, I don't even have to kind of explain to anybody really what they do because the name almost says it, even though the name is a play on words. That's good fun. So if I sort of walk me through it, and I'm going to be mentally walking through it in my head. So if I phoned you up, say I was a manager at an organisation and needed your help, like I want to get more neurodiverse people in, or I've got neurodiverse people in. Oh my God, what do I do with them? Because they're neurotypical and I'm not sure. How do you help? I know there's going to be billions of ways, but if it was a sort of typical early stage thing.
So I think the first thing is, is the manager talking about somebody they think is neurodiverse, neurodivergent, or has actually asked for help? So if somebody hasn't disclosed, then they have to speak to HR about the correct policy about doing that. So make the assumption that the person who is neurodivergent has said, I think I have this, or I have X condition, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. The first thing you do with the manager is there are two pieces. So you've got how they support the employee and how they have the knowledge themselves to do that. So you would recommend that they do some form of awareness training so they actually understand the conditions. They have an awareness of, like if you look at the neurodiversity look modules, it talks about what the condition is and how you can support that person in the workplace, and then the types of adjustments. So that gives an overview for that person so the manager understands. So then what will happen is the manager will get a screening or a diagnostic assessment for the individual, depending upon how old their diagnostic is, or whether the person wants a screening to just reassess where they're at, Or then the next stage would be, so that says this is where the condition is at, if they have dyslexia and these are the areas of strength and challenge. The next is a workplace assessment. So that is, think about if you have a bad back, somebody comes in and they write down physical adjustments. So think of it like that, but for cognitive adjustments. So what you do is you go into the workplace. With COVID, it's been more on Zoom. And you go through a discussion about the different tasks that person does in their job role. If it's health and safety related, you sometimes usually have to go in and see that person in their environment. So it might be on a shop floor. If it's an office-based job, it tends to be, you look at the documents that they read, the types of tasks that they do on their computer, which tend to involve, organisation, reading, writing, that type of thing, maybe doing presentations. And then you talk about the things that they have their strengths, things that they have challenges with. And you write all these down, then you'll tend to speak to the line manager or a relevant individual about their experience with the consent of that person, about their strengths and areas of development. Within that report, you get different types of recommendations. So if you take reading, it might be recommendations for a certain amount of coaching in that area, recommendations for assistive technology like Dragon Naturally Speaking, where you speak and it types for you, or things like Clara Read and Write Gold, where it reads out the text aloud.
Yes.
That would be sort of the example of workplace assessment. And the third stage is coaching. So that would be coaching for the individual. So that would be things like improving your reading, improving your writing, note-taking, confidence, social interaction, might be if you're dealing with autism, etc. So that's not the individual journey. But then also what you do is you can do co-coaching, where the line manager and the individual only have someone facilitating that conversation. So the line manager starts to understand the individual and how they work. The line manager sort of speaks about how they receive information, how they give information. They learn about each other's learning styles, and it helps the manager really understand the condition and support the individual so they can work together more collaboratively. So co-coaching is a very powerful thing to do to help the manager and the neurodivergent individual work together successfully. A classic example can be maybe an autistic engineer. He can be technically excellent, but if you put him into a line manager role, he might struggle. But he might be the best technical person you've got in your team. So why would you want to not keep this person in your team who's so technically skilled? So then what the line manager might do is actually take the line management off and give it to someone else. So that type of conversation can really help explore what this person's strengths are, how they can be enabled by the organisation, how the organisation can enable themselves.
Are you finding that there's becoming changes in team structures to be able to post people in positions? Because currently a British structure really is you go up, and then you can become manager if you want to be promoted any further. But clearly, in the example you've given, it's not the ideal situation. But are you finding the structure's changing that say that our autistic person can carry on being promoted and growing their career without having to kind of delve into the management side, which really doesn't play into their strengths?
I think it depends. I would say when you're working with more technical organisations, so if you're working with maybe more scientists, that technical engineering, you tend to find there's a natural people structure and a technical structure. When you're working with organisations like maybe Google and stuff, you can see that there's coding and managers. Yeah. But sometimes in organisations, they don't have that. So what you are starting to see is this whole concept of rather than have a role and put the individual into a role, it's about actually shaping the role to the individual. Because what can happen is, I think you can see, particularly with some of the assessment selection centres, which is still applied, which may be coming from the 90s, they select someone that's an all-rounder and good at everything. But they might not have the key skills. They might not have the person that's really creative and really innovative. And I actually think with neurodivergence, you tend to find people can excel in certain areas. So I'm very ideas orientated, very good at concepts, but it's quite a specific thing. So I definitely feel like that when you are looking for someone who's an all-rounder, you actually miss out on some of the specialist skills, on some of these beautiful nuggets that really the organisation needs to move forward. I think also what that then causes, if you have everyone who is similar, then when they're interviewing somebody, they're looking for somebody that's like them.
Yes,
classically
the cognitive bias.
The coder might be on the spectrum, and he might be the best coder in the world, but he might not look at you. He might be, or she might be quite unconfident. My friend's autistic, and she's incredible at coding, She
Right.
said that she left the organisation because she was so stressed about going into a management role.
Oh, well, no.
And when she interviews, she finds it hard to give eye contact. So very often people are judging on a skill that actually isn't the crucial skill that the company needs. So it's really important that companies are actually learning to recruit in a way that aligns with what the job is. So if it's a coding job, do a coding task to really have a look at what they're doing. And it's really important that the interview panel are really understanding what they're looking for rather than putting their own unconscious bias onto the person that they're interviewing. The classic is don't just have a job description and fit the person in. It's about looking at what are the real priorities of the role and shaping the role to suit that person, because that blend will really help both the individual and the company excel and move forward in the areas they need to.
Yeah, because imagine there's no job on a team that somebody really loves. Like there's like bits I hate, I guess, like I've had in previous jobs where it's like, I just have to do this bit because it needs to be done. But I know somebody else across the office who thinks that's the best thing ever, and I don't understand it. And they can't work out why I really love the bit I'm doing.
No, absolutely. And it's like, the person that wants to proofread and analyse information all day, they can go ahead, because I will not be doing that. Whereas I don't mind process mapping. I like ideas. I like concepts. I like talks. And that's why the world goes around. And that's why it's really important that a world of diverse minds is where magic is created, because that's when the blend of, if you think about maybe Elon Musk, you think about, he's on the spectrum. And you think about,
yes, yes.
If you think about all these think tank organisations that create the future, if they did not have that diversity of mind, they wouldn't be able to move forward with some of these most amazing initiatives. And that's what they understand. And if you actually look at some of the most successful people in the world, they're neurodiverse.
Yes.
Because they're breaking out some books, but they need non-neurodiverse people to help them get there. So that's why it's always about people coming together, because a blend of skill only achieves success in different ways of thinking.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. There's a lot of innovation driven by neurodiverse people, but it's a very good point you make that actually having neurotypical there is part of that process, because not everybody can do everything. And it's something I'm sort of working at the minute is, how do I get the best out of myself as a dyslexic person? Then how do I communicate with people who are not dyslexic some of my ideas, or how do I get things back from them, so to speak, that help me do my job and help? Because ultimately what we want to do as a team is deliver on a project to a high standard, and we've all got the same goal in theory. So it is really interesting. I'm kind of working on it at the moment. Like, I realise that I've got something on the CAD screen and I've got one bit here and one bit over here, and my brain is filled in the middle bit and I can CAD it in later. But the people behind me can't see that. And it's like, how do I get it out of my head onto the screen or into their minds? And it's a really interesting thing trying to figure out at the minute.
Yeah, that sounds like me. Like, because it's like I might be going, I can see this concept. Yeah, I know, understand it. I get it. But people can't see that I get it unless I get it out. Thank God for mind mapping software. Thank God for CAD, any visual software,
Yeah. I'll just draw this up. Yes. Yeah. Do you use a particular mind mapping software?
It's varied over the years. I think I like the simplicity of MindView. I quite like that.
Okay.
Mind Manager I've used in the past. If I was a student or workplace, I'd do MindView.
Okay, cool. And I thought we'd sort of dive back a little bit to obviously your school days when you didn't know you were dyslexic. Have you found that when you got picked up at university, and now as you've now made a career in dyslexia, really, or neurodiversity, I suppose, you look back on some of the school stuff and go, oh yeah, if only I'd had this.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a catch-22. I think the first thing is when I got a diagnosis, I was like, yeah, relief. And then I got really angry. It's like, well, why did nobody give me this help before? Because I think when I've met people who've been diagnosed with dyslexia in their youth, they seem to be much more confident and have the strategies because they've learned them from a very young age. So I remember thinking that. And then I remember being, it's a relief, it's an anger, it's a frustration, it's a why me, it's all these things.
Yeah.
And now, reflecting on that diagnosis, which was early 20s, now I'm in my 40s and I reflect on it and I go, I wouldn't change it. Like, it was so tough. School was so tough and I had to work so hard. But, if I think about what I've created and how it's enabled other people. And if I think about the journey I'm on now, with the joy in my life and the different things I get involved in and the freedom I have, I wouldn't change that for the world. So I think like, I feel really blessed to be dyslexic and have dyslexia. But I do think that at school, I wish I'd had access to more tools that enable me to learn in different ways. I think the one reason I say that is I love books. I love audiobooks. And when audiobooks became way more accessible, I just devour all this information and I love it. And I remember even doing my master's, you know, I was like, there was an academic text. I was like, I wish it was available in audiobook. And that was only a few years ago. You know, I wish that was the second master's, you know. So I wish that was available because I could then just listen to all of it and just be in the world and, you know, be really raptured in the world of, you know, neuropsychology. So I think that audiobooks just opens up a whole new world. And then I wrote a blog on this, but talking to my friend who goes, I can't take in audiobooks, but I love to read. I just like then, oh, well, maybe it's the way the world is designed, because if the world was all audiobooks, I would not be dyslexic and he would be.
Yes.
So it shows you how like different mediums and different things are so important. So I'm absolutely privileged to have dyslexia, but I wish the world was designed with a more universal design perspective where there was way more ways of accessing and being creative. And I think obviously computers allow for that. But I also think it's interesting the way the world is going with technology, because I think dyslexic and neurodiverse minds, as we move along, will actually benefit from that world more so than maybe someone who isn't neurodiverse.
Yes, yeah, but what am I, 37? So you and I probably went to school in the 80s and 90s. And I found out I was dyslexic at 6. I've had assistance for most of school, but it was really only the extra time in exams and being pulled out to have sort of one-on-one lessons. And there was stuff involved in that, but it wasn't really until I went to uni. When would have that been? Sort of 2011. Yeah, a laptop turned up with Dragon on it, with, I can't remember if it was Clara or Text Help, one of the two. And I thought, wow, all of this stuff just, I would sit there and present to the computer to write a report, which then was great because I'd already rehearsed the presentation by the time I needed to give it later on the same subject. So, and that is, as you say, the technology is really helping it. Like, there's plenty of hacks on the website that just use your common smartphone, really, without any assistive tech on it, because quite a lot of accessibility on it really helps. You can get it talked to you. You can talk to it if you want to do a text message. You can highlight bits of text and get it to read out loud. And it's like, this is great.
Amazing. It's so amazing. It's like whoever invented Dragon as well. That's just so clever.
Yes.
It's just incredible. And then the all cam where you can look at something and it reads it to you. You know, it's just amazing. Yes.
All cam are coming on the podcast soon, so it'll be interesting to hear what was all behind that. But it is amazing. And the visual-based interface that is iOS, Android, Windows really helps us. I look at most things and can know by symbology my way through it rather than having the old Nokia rolling through with all the text on it. And I think that kind of really plays into dyslexic visual learners' strengths, which is, it's getting great. I think we've covered sort of quite a lot so far. So I was going to sort of start diving into, I have some rapid fire questions that are I talk around the podcast out with. They don't need rapid fire answers from yourself, so feel free to say as much as you like, but I think we've got quite a few of them covered anyway. So my first one is, what prejudice would you've had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
I think maybe the one thing I thought is that everyone was, before I specialised in dyslexia, when I got my diagnosis, I thought when you're dyslexic, you have similar difficulties. And even though you do have similar, the broad profile of dyslexia is there, it was really interesting to see, as I specialise in this area, the range of variation there is within the dyslexia profiles. And, how some people can be really very spatially aware and how some people can be very artistic. So it was interesting to see the difference of the different dyslexia profiles that we come across and how different brains work. And I've always been fascinated by the brain, where people say they can see movies in their head and they can see things in their head and they can play them through. And it's just incredible. It's just an amazing skill. I'm also very auditory, which is fairly unusual.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it can be more visual and more kinesthetic when you're dyslexic. So I've always been I love assessing people that are very artistic and creative and very visual in the way they think, because I find that type of brain very interesting.
So, because that's how I think with the visual stuff, that there is stuff playing in my head, but I'm struggling to visualize what being auditory is like.
So maybe rather than visualize a concept, I'll think about a concept in words. And I do visualize, but I'll think about it more in words. What does that mean?
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. Because again, I'm trying to bend that into an image and it's clearly not working. But yeah, you are right that no two dyslexics are the same. And sometimes I can't spot other dyslexic people. I am getting better at it as I do more and more in neurodiversity.
You definitely get people that are similar profiles, but it's a difference in profiles, you know?
Yeah, and it is quite wide, isn't it? So I imagine you have quite a lot of this through your work, where you'll have 3 people in the team that are dyslexic and they all need different strategies to work in the team.
I think because of the type of job they're doing, you can find it similar. But I think if you had, say, different professions, so you might find somebody who finds reading comprehension easier than spelling. But if you had, like, an artist, an architect, and a scientist, you would see maybe more variation in the profiles.
Yes, I guess, because we all sort of sift down to our careers that sort of have people with similar interests. That does make sense. Okay, second rapid fire question. If an alien came down, how would you describe dyslexia to them?
You see, this brings you back to thought experiments. It's like the one where there's a lady who's locked in a room and has never seen colour. How do you describe what blue is? And I think this is where if an alien came down, maybe I wouldn't describe dyslexia, because I think, dyslexia is a construct of society based upon how society is labelled and processed. And as I talked about earlier, with that chap, if it was all audiobooks, then maybe he would be dyslexic. So I think that I would say I wouldn't describe dyslexia to the alien. I would say people think in lots of different ways, and lots of people have different skills, and that's what makes the world go round. So I might be able to draw a picture. Somebody might be able to write a book. Somebody might be able to sing the most beautiful song. And that's why humans are so beautiful, because we're all so different and have so many different gifts that we can give to the world, which makes the world a wonderful place. I think that's more how I would go about it.
No, that is a brilliant way of thinking about it. Yeah, rather than giving you the preconception. Okay, so last question, and seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hacks show, any dyslexia life hacks?
Yes. So I think it's more about when you say to yourself, am I good enough? So very often when we're children and we're growing up, you are externalized, your intelligence is externalized by your grade. And very often in our the way education measures intelligence tends to be in what you can read and how you can write. But obviously there's many more types of intelligence than that. There's artistic intelligence, musical intelligence. So what that can then mean very often with a dyslexic person is they can externalize their values. They can say that I'm not good enough because I haven't got that grade, and they learn to externalize that value. So the next time you feel that you're not good enough, the dyslexia life hack is to say, is that thought true? Because if I'm a footballer, I might be brilliant at scoring goals, but I might be not very good at reading something or writing an essay. And so have a think about, you're saying, you're not good enough, but what actually are you good at? And are your thoughts actually true all the time? Do you need to believe all your thoughts? So a more extreme example is an anorexic girl looks in the mirror and she says that she's fat. Is that true? So when you think of that in relation to dyslexia, if you say you're not good enough, is that actually true? So not all your thoughts are necessarily going to be true. So start to observe how you speak to yourself and think about, you might be not very good at writing essays, but you're great at baking or great at gardening or great at empathizing with people and listening to people. So start to think about what you're good at rather than not focus on things that you struggle with, because everyone has a balance of both.
Wow. Yes. Yeah, having hung on to a lot of incorrect beliefs for most of my childhood and through my 20s. I resonate quite a lot with that one. No, that is a great message to put out there. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
I think that when you're diagnosed with dyslexia, it can be difficult. And when you're struggling with academia and childhood, you can see the world as against you. But if you just get diagnosed and you stop at diagnosis, then you'll never actually be given the strategies which enable you to learn differently, which allow you to experience success. The one I was talking about earlier in terms of I used to read, really try and get it in my head. Suddenly assistive technology came along and I saw success because I was learning a different strategy. What that then started to do is I started to believe in myself. The penny dropped. I could actually do something I couldn't do before. So try not to stop at a diagnosis. Try and access the support and the coaching and the assistive technology, because that's where you'll see the change. And that'll get you to start believing the world works for you rather than against you. And then you'll start to see opportunities where maybe you didn't see opportunities before.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. Knowing what it is step one. And then you can jump into the wonderful world of various dyslexia coaching or hacks or help assistive technology that unlocks the door. And yeah, it did for me. And it sounds like it definitely did for you as well. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Where can people find you if they want to use your services at all?
Yeah, so Lexic is www.lexic.com, and we have a blog and social media presence. So you can always write to hello@lexic.com or nicolajames@lexic.com. And then we also have the e-learning, which is neurotalentunlocked.com, and that gives you sort of e-learning modules and things like that. There's loads of great stuff out there, like podcasts like this, which make a real difference. So if not, find someone who inspires you, who's got neurodiverse condition and is maybe setting an example, and follow them and follow their Twitter and see what they post and talk about.
Yes. As always, I will put all the links to that in the show notes, which are available at dyslexialifehacks.com. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show this evening. It's been fascinating and really interesting talking to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's great to share our stories with the world.
Yes. And I want to thank everybody else for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye.